Thank you, Renai. And it's amazing how AI actually plays an important role in not just risk compliance, but generating new value through a better customer experience, because I know that customer doesn't have to go through all these processes again, but also in terms of, revenue loss that we are preventing through a process like Untethered. I think that's amazing. And thank you for giving me that opportunity to talk about how we've actually make sure that this can be operationalized. This can become part of your business as usual. And I think often we sort of assume that if you take on AI and you invest in AI, that the results will just come, the value will just come. It's actually a very intentional process you have to follow to make sure that we can actually get to that value. And that's why we're saying that when we're talking about MLOps, it's formalizing that process from insights to action and then to value. And why those three things? Because when you look at organizations now today, and we see this at the big organizations here in Africa, is people hire data scientists, they invest in AI, they've got these great models, they've got great models like Hunter, but now they're saying, okay, what do we do to make sure we can take those insights and action it? And again, Hunter is great in saying, we identify different population groups, different agents that could be problematic, and now action needs to be taken. And then from action, how do we make sure that the business can actually get value from it? And to be able to get to that point, you have to ask yourself a few questions. So one of the questions I've listed there is, yes, do I have advanced models? Do I have the AI stuff? But is it getting used by business? And once you ask yourself that question, you start realizing that, maybe I should have an adoption framework to make sure business understands AI, they understand the outputs that could come from a Hunter.ai platform or from other AI models or from other analytics models, and they understand how to use it to make action. And that's where the value comes from. So do you have models and are business using it? And very often when, we go through the exercise with our clients, we'll see, no, we've got 50 data scientists. We've got each one of them is busy with a model. And then when we ask them, let's go to business, ask how many of them are being used. They said, yeah, that model was cool, but we're not using it. And then that 50 goes down to 5 and often even just 1. And you'll often see that actually the data scientists are then struggling to work with business to make it work. The second question we ask is then, how do you manage and govern that? What's your process from, often data scientists sit on their laptop and they're working on a model. How do you then make sure that there's a process from them taking that model, that code that could be 100, 1,000 lines, to actually making sure it can be productized, it can be packaged into something that makes sense for business. And often we do this as data scientists. We just create a little dashboard for them and say, it looks cool. Look what the model is producing. But we need to do more than just providing the dashboard to business. We need to provide them that process and that thing that they can use in their normal day-to-day business activities that they are working with. And then the last question we ask is so what platform do you use? Because if you are just going to say, but our data scientists are working on their laptop and they're installing the right packages, but okay, then what? How do that package model move to a data engineering pipeline, move to an operational pipeline? What is the platform that you use to make that easy, to make it efficient, so that the data scientists who should be focusing on the cool models and AI isn't focusing on trying to make this data pipeline work or trying to make this deployment pipeline work? Because if you were to interview most of the data scientists in the world today, you will see they tell you, oh no, 70% of my time is spent on data engineering, 20% is spent on trying to get this deployed, and 10% is actual on the model. And if AI is becoming so important in our global construct, we want our data scientists to focus on the cool AI and not on the other processes that can actually be done automatic, that can actually be industrialized, and that can make it easy for them to deploy. So once you've asked those questions, you now want to know, okay, so what? How do I get from the one point to the other point? And like I explained, many of our businesses that we work with sit sort of here on the left-hand side. And this is our insights-driven organization framework, where, if you're sitting on the left-hand side, you're still doing sort of these ad hoc models. Business still needs to pick up a phone or on Teams, ask the data scientist, where's this model? Or, can you make this change to your model? And then when business asks that change, it's that data scientist having to go back the laptop and, coding it. And then 6 months later, business gets the change. That should be something that's automatic, just like that. So most of the organization sits here on the left-hand side where it's ACOP, it's silo. There isn't really a process of industrialization. And that's where MLOps comes in. We want to take businesses from the left-hand side, ACOP, to where MLOps, machine learning, AI is industrialized. It's part of your fabric. It's part of your DNA. You know what processes to follow. Even the new data scientist, the new data engineer, the new business analyst, the new data analyst that joins knows that, okay, this is the process that I follow. It's easy. I focus on my part of the pipeline, but the pipeline works. It's automatic. It's operational. Business knows how to use it. They know they're actually waiting for that output, and they understand how that whole pipeline and end-to-end value chain works. So we then move clients from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, where it isn't just industrialized, but think of the next step, where it's part of your DNA. It's part of what you do on a daily basis. Your HR administrator is using AI. Your cleaner is using AI to understand where's the next spill. Where should I go? What tools should I use? No, my mop should be replaced in the next 3 days. Why not? That means AI is part of every business process in an organization. That's where you can say, I'm an insights-driven organization. I'm not spending millions of dollars to get the value. I'm efficient, I'm effective, I'm spending little, but I'm getting a lot, because that's what AI brings to you. And what do you need to do that is, we've listed 3 things here. You need to have the right kind of technology platforms like Renai and Janaya spoke about, making sure that you can actually say, my business process, my value chain is enabled with the right technology. And often that is cloud, often it is hybrid, but you need advice to make sure, okay, what's the technology that would work for my organization, given our culture, given our business processes? The second question you have to ask is, what's my processes and frameworks? Do I have an adoption process? Do I make sure that there's actually a value chain framework that works for me? Can I articulate the value? Can I measure the value? Can I monitor the value? That is all part of the processes and frameworks that you need to establish within your organization. And then lastly, it's about people. We started this organization with the culture and having an innovation culture. Because often we as businesses don't realize that data science is called science for a reason. It's experimental. It means it's innovative. It means new things will come out that might fail. And again, if you have that efficient process, if you have a good technology platform, it's easier to have lots of experimentation, of which some will fail and some will succeed. And we have to make sure that people are aware of that culture. And we're saying a good innovation culture. We're not just speaking about, there's your data science group and they're innovative. It's throughout the organization. Business understands that, you need to give time and the option of failure for our data scientists. Business needs to understand for our data engineers, you need to make sure they have the efficient and the right technology to do their work. And if you put these 3 things in place, the technology, the process, and the people, you will move from the left gray bit where it's ad hoc to industrialize and where it's part of your culture. And that is what we want to do as Deloitte for our clients and for our organizations. And then my last slide is, if you do this right, like what's the sort of benefits that you will see? And the benefits that you will see is, if on my next slide I show, you can see that first of all is what I've been talking about, is this efficient process in this place where actually it's easier for you to create models, for your data scientists to train models, to deploy models. And we've seen actually, in terms of that, making it easier for your data scientists and data engineers, that you can get an 80% reduction. And when I tell people that, they often don't want to believe me. But we've seen data scientists working on the same model for 2 years. Yes, they've got a model in the first 6 months and then they improve. But often business then would say, do this, do that. And that data scientist gets bored to working on the same model for 2 years, when it should have been a 2-month, 2-week process. That's why you can see that 80% reduction from where your data is sourced and ingested to where the model is deployed at the end of it. Then you also want to make it easier to share and collaborate on models. It's not the data scientists that necessarily understand business and have the best idea of how to structure and build a model. They need to work with business to get that insight, to understand how will business use the model. How should I set up my deployment pipeline so that it works for business? How should I do my feature engineering so that it matches the sort of expertise and experience that business has? And that's why you must make it easy to collaborate on models. You must make it easy for business to say, look, make this change. And then, within 2 days, the change is implemented and deployed and business can look at the results. And that is why we're saying that turnaround time, once you decrease that turnaround time between your engineers, your scientists, your business, you can actually make sure that the opportunity cost is reduced. And that opportunity cost in terms of what AI can bring for you is important. It changes. We've seen in the last 6 months how much AI has changed, not just in terms of the type of models that can be produced, but the business change it brings. And if that turnaround time isn't short, the opportunity cost is lost. Thirdly, you want to protect your model, right? You want to protect your IP. You want to make sure when you package the model, when you package the results of the model, it's done in a way that it's actually protected and your IP is still yours. And I think that is important because you want to bring down that risk that we've seen that AI models where it's just a black box makes. And if it's not a black box, if you actually make sure you understand how to protect that IP, how that IP works, you can make sure that the inherent risk that we often realize with AI is trustworthy. There's something that makes sure that it's ethical, it's transparent. And that leads me to the fourth point, where it actually establishes trust with business. We've seen that gap between business trusting a model and what it says versus what the data scientist is developing in the model. We want to make sure that that's a trusted relationship. And you only do it through doing this in an ethical way, in a transparent way, in making sure not just your whole pipeline is transparent, but the actual code within the model is visible. So that if somebody actually looks at your whole pipeline, they see, yes, data ingestion, model development, deployment, but they can go into model development and see, oh, it produced these outputs for these reasons. So now I understand how to protect it against bias and against ethical use of AI as well. And then the key thing, and this is what business want, right, is either new revenue or operational savings. And if you say that MLOps and AI is working for your organization, you should be able to say and point to there's the 1 or 2 models that's making $8 million, $10 million of difference in my business, whether that's through new revenue or new cost savings. But you should be able to point to that. And we've seen this at our clients. Like you don't need a big thing, you don't need 100, but if you have one model that changes your organizations like that, you see the revenue difference. But you should also be pointing to your whole pipeline, because if your whole pipeline is working, then you'll see the 20 models that's a $1 million difference or a $5 million difference, or you'll see the 50 models that's smaller than that, because it's working. And there's daily, not just producing of models, there's daily value generation from that models. And it's an efficient, easy processes where the people that's in the circle there, your data science champions, your data scientists, your data architects, and most importantly, the people that's using it, your business analysts and your business people themselves, understand this whole process, and all of them can point to the difference that AI can make. And once you operationalize that, and that is what is sort of key for us to do, is to make sure we can build that culture for our clients and operationalize it for them. So I think that's our story. I think we've left some time for Q&A and for you to just conclude for us.
Thanks, Quentin. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We are going to open it up for Q&A. So if there are any questions online, then please type them in the chat. Might be difficult for us to see from here, but Vanessa, I'll maybe ask you to just read them out for us as they go. But before I close, Quentin, one thing, I'm going to ask you a question. Maybe I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. And maybe just think through from an African perspective, what are you seeing in the market from companies actually starting to use AI, ML, research? I know that you're quite involved from a I mean, you are involved from highly experimental unit. You've been an integral part of the AI team. Just think through that a little bit, and I'll get back to you in a minute. But it'll be good to get your insights around what is actually happening from an African perspective across. Jania, if you've got any thoughts on your side from a West African perspective, it would also be good to get those. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to think through that, and then for all the attendees, I think it was great to have you. I think I want to conclude the story, and I want to conclude and just bring us back to where we start. So for us, from an African perspective and from a company perspective and how we've used AI, for us, it's been one hell of a journey. It's been really exciting all the way through creating the culture of innovation and actually figuring out how do we do this? What's the best approach? There were lots of mistakes along the way over the last couple of years, and Quentin, you can share on that as well. But there's been lots of mistakes, lots of learnings, lots of things that I think we can do differently. And I think part of it is because it's such an evolving field of study. I mean, if you asked 6 months ago around ChatGPT, no one knew about ChatGPT, or very few people knew about ChatGPT, and now every single day there's something new that comes out, or another company that's doing something with it, or for a competitor coming on board, etc. So for us, that the whole innovation process, the culture process, has been quite rewarding. I think the one thing and the one insights that I'll share is from an African perspective that we are seeing is the ability for a lot of especially junior guys coming into business, solving business problems, the way that they solve business and the way that they just think intuitively and differently and innovatively has been amazing to see. We're seeing it across the board from a William's perspective, from a highly experimental unit, from a production perspective, but also from a solving of real business problems. I think one of the real benefits we have in Africa really is just there's so many different cultures, so many different ways of thinking, and so much innovative thinking. And we are really trying to tap more and more into that from an African perspective for Deloitte as a whole and globally as well. So from an innovation perspective, that's really one of the things. From a highly experimental unit, I mean, there's hugely exciting things happening in that space and research and going into that. And that's really how we're starting to embed that into business and how we're starting to embed that to solve real business problems. We took you through Hunter, Renai, and Jania. It's one of those products on our side and solutions on our side that is just expanding every single day. The way that we use it to do our own work when we go to clients, the way that our clients are using it to solve their business problems. It's amazing to see how our people are just embracing it and starting to use AI more and more, and starting to move away from it's AI, I'm not sure how it works, I'm not sure what the details are behind it, I'm not sure how decisions are made. And it's amazing for me at least to see how that change is happening, and you can see the change happening. And then lastly, and I guess we're on that journey now, the MLOps component, where we're really integrating the solutions, everything we've talked about, into literally our daily lives and how we do things. So it was great to have everyone. We've got 8 or so minutes left. I think let's go to a question, and then I might hand back to you.
So we do have a question online. I hope you can hear the question. If not, can you just repeat it? From an internal audit perspective, how can you audit the risk of implementing such technology in the organization? And what are the key controls that a firm can implement to mitigate such risks?
Just read it again, sorry.
From an internal audit perspective, how can you audit the risk of implementing such technology in the organization? And what are the key controls that a firm can implement to mitigate such risks?
You go ahead.
So I think from an internal audit, the question is really around internal audit and how can we audit systems like this and the key controls to mitigate the risk. That's really broadly the questions. I think what we're really seeing is we do need to understand how the system works, and in order to do that, you need to actually have quite a deep technical knowledge of the system. So it is bringing the technical side of things together with the internal auditors and the subject matter experts, and bringing those two people and organize or different subject matters together, and really working together to figure out what are the specific controls we want to put in. And those controls can be very different. It might be model monitoring, it might be monitoring the solution on how decisions are made, the way in which decisions are made. I think in a previous earlier today on the event, someone talks about explainability and understanding. I mean, that's a key control that broadly we need to embed in organizations. It's not something that we're seeing has gone, that's happened a lot. But for me, I guess, or for me at least, key controls and key things are you need to understand how the system works. You need to technically understand how decisions are made to a large degree, especially in a regulated audit-specific space. And you need to be continuously monitoring that. You can't just let it go. I mean, you're hearing about more and more instances where Google don't really know how decisions are being made in their LLM and AI models. Same with Facebook, same with a lot of the other big companies. So really continuously monitoring that, moving from I'm checking this model or I'm checking this solution once every year to continuously checking that, continuously checking the data that you're using for it, which is a big issue in South Africa, in Africa at least, and making sure that you've actually put that measures in place to do that. Quentin, I don't know if you want to add.
I'll just latch on to say that Deloitte have actually developed this trustworthy AI framework and tool associated with that, which we've used with two of our big African clients as well. And I think Jana used it even in West Africa, and she can share that a little bit. But I think there's another question for us.
What is the key to unlocking AI capability in the organization? How do you remove barriers to adoption?
Yeah, I think that's where the MLOps process that we've developed is quite important. And that's where you focus on those three things that I've mentioned, right? Like the technology one is both the enabler and removing the technical barriers. The people one is actually where you need to focus. And we've seen that most of the blockages that we've experienced with our clients is on the people aspect. It's related to three things, right? It's one, people understanding AI and how to use it. Secondly, people sort of, the attitude that people have towards AI in terms of because they don't understand it, they immediately put their blockages up. And then thirdly is the adoption framework. Like it's actually showing people that, look, it's not just a model that's going to be on a dashboard. This is how you implement it within your business process. And that adoption framework is key to not just, removing the technical barriers, but the people barriers as well. And I think that is where the focus should be to remove the barriers.
I think one thing I'll add there is it's also getting some wins on the board, right? For an organization. The easiest way to get people to use something is to make them excited, is to show them the value that can be created, and to show them that this actually works and it's real and you can explain it, and you can understand it, and you can embed it in your organization. We've seen at a number of clients, the rubber really hits the road when you start to implement. And Quentin, you mentioned this earlier, but the moment you start to implement it and the moment you start to measure the benefit that gets created from these solutions, and then getting people really excited about it and showing them this is how we've done it in our organization with our data. We're finding more and more people really they want to know that it's going to work in their organization, on their data, with their culture, with their people, and being able to show them practically what it means for them, for you as an organization, or for them as an organization, and practically getting them to actually then start using it is probably the best way. There's lots of AI movements, I think, globally. I've mentioned ChatGPT earlier, and there's excitement on it. And I think we as AI practitioners, I guess, and people wanting to use it more, and technology people, we really need to leverage off that. And we need to use that to actually get people excited and start to use these AI type solutions more and more, and get people excited on the art of the possible and the possibilities of doing that. I've heard of a number of clients that's actually used ChatGPT to do presentations for boards and for their senior management, and it's created a huge buzz in the organization. And suddenly everyone sees it and makes it real, and they want to start to use it, and then you start to build some momentum.
The next question is about the highly experimental unit. What happens when experiments fail?
I'm going to ask Will to answer that because he is the lead. So Will, maybe just come up and you want to take that.
Sure, thanks. It's a great question. And experiments failing is a reality that we have to face. But I think upfront, we realize that this is a real risk. I think when I spoke earlier, I mentioned that I wouldn't necessarily call a failed experiment a failure. Inherently, when one does an experiment, you realize that it might not work out. And so the leaders that we have also realize this, and they're willing to invest the necessary resources, even if we tell them at the end of the day, sorry, didn't work out. But, one has to have a proactive mindset, and we're all about learning and evolving ourselves. So we take what we can from an experiment that didn't work out the way we want, and we try to make the most of it.
Yeah, and I think upfront one needs to understand, 9 might fail, but the one that succeeds is going to make up for more than 10 times the others. Yeah.
And our last question is around how does the African market hinder or support innovation?
I think, and what you're referring to is that balance, right? That balance between where our clients want to get the AI fundamentals right, and they're struggling because there's a war on talent. They don't necessarily have the capacity to pay for the right technology, etc. So that's the AI fundamental part, but the innovation part, where we know that the customer behavior on the African continent is different than we think and requires real innovation. You need something like reinforcement learning in logistics, given the infrastructure challenges that we face. So it is a balance, and how our clients get it right is to say, let's start small. Let's get that first part right. Let's build that fundamentals and get the capacity. Let's show the value, and then use the value generated from that small thing to do the innovative part. So it's really an iterative journey where slowly starting small and that pie, that value is getting bigger, and incrementally you can do more. And we've seen our clients that has been successful is getting that balance right between the AI fundamentals and the innovation part.
Thanks, Quinton. Thanks, everyone. I think that's all for us. It's 9 o'clock, so we're gonna go back north, or go north, and hand it over to the Central Europe team. Thanks for joining.